I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to introduce our panel on ecosystems leadership, new scope, new skills. Now, as an area of study, leadership is actually a relatively modern discipline, but it's one in which its roots, its foundations, were laid in an era when many organizations, I would argue probably most organizations, were hierarchical and self-contained. And as we've heard over the last few days, our environment, our context today is very different. One in which organizational boundaries are increasingly blurred and fluid, in which there are all sorts of fascinating new models of networks and alliances and partnerships, and where even the nature of the organization itself is changing, in some cases radically, as we heard yesterday from Hire and Tencent, and as we heard this morning from some fascinating and innovative new models with healthcare organizations. So in this new world of networks and collaborations and partnership models that stretch across organizational boundaries, we wanted to take some time to reflect on what does that mean for leadership and how leaders need to act and interact both internally and externally in this new context. And of course, we all know that while there's been a lot of change so far, we're on the cusp of so much more change to come. As one of the CEOs I work with likes to put it, the pace of change will never again be this slow. The pace of change will never again be this slow. It's only going to accelerate. There's only going to be more disruption. And so in today's panel, we want to reflect on what this means for leadership and for leaders. And we're going to explore this topic from a number of different angles. We're going to look at an organizational level. What does it mean for organizations, and how do they need to become more open and innovative, more collaborative, more curious, more adaptable? We're going to explore how leaders need to create more trust-based relationships, both within their organizations and also across their ecosystem. We're going to look at creating a deep sense of purpose and what it takes to really do that, and what some of the tough trade-offs and challenges look like, and how to create a culture of curiosity and learning and collaboration. So how can leaders create the conditions for success for themselves and their organizations? And of course, we're not going to just look at an organizational level. We're also going to look at an individual level. We're going to explore what are the skills that leaders need to build for themselves and for their current and future leaders in their organizations. What are the mindsets and behaviors that need to be in place? We recently conducted a global study of senior executives around the world, and one of the alarming findings was that 80% of those senior executives, very successful senior executives, operate most of the time in a reactive mode, in a reactive state of mind, 80%. So we're also going to explore what would it take to go from a reactive to a creative state of mind, from ways of working that have sometimes been command and control to ways of working that are much more about trust and empowerment and partnership, from mindsets that are more about certainty to mindsets about discovery, mindsets of scarcity to mindsets of abundance. So we're going to look at all these questions. How do you create the conditions for leaders to be successful in this new ecosystem world? Questions that are increasingly critical as we see growing complexity, connectedness, and change. Now, to explore these questions, we have an absolutely amazing panel this afternoon, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by such exceptional people. All the way to my right, we have Peter Oswald, the group CEO of Mondi, a truly extraordinary organization delivering amazing performance and really groundbreaking innovation on sustainability. Amy Edmondson, professor of leadership and management at Harvard Business School. We've all talked over the last 2 days about psychological safety, and she, of course, has done the groundbreaking work on both psychological safety and leadership and cross-boundary teaming. And so we're thrilled to have Amy joining us this afternoon. Raj Sisodia, professor at Babson College, co-author and co-founder of the movement on conscious capitalism. We're delighted to have you with us to share your thoughts and perspectives. Truly pivotal work that you're doing. Kim Dabbs, who is the Global Director of Social Innovation at Steelcase, and a prolific author and speaker on TEDx, Aspen, Guggenheim, and more. And last but by no means least, Jennifer Petriglieri, who is Associate Professor at INSEAD, and who's done some groundbreaking work on women leadership and has just published her latest book on couples that work, who's going to help us explore the more personal ecosystems that help leaders be successful and thrive in the workplace. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask Peter to share a few thoughts and perspectives about what is ecosystem leadership? How does it work? What are the challenges and opportunities? So over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mary. I hope I'm not amongst the 80% reactive leaders. At least I try. It's a fascinating subject, isn't it? How do you lead ecosystems? And I would like to start off with a very practical example, what we are faced in at Mondi. At Mondi, we are a packaging and paper company, so naturally these pictures going around the world about plastic waste, this is not just for us personally a big concern, but it's also as a company. And so we said, what can we actually contribute? There is this enormous problem that there are today 350 million tons of plastic. Only 15% of that is recycled, and the rest is in the best case incinerated, but the biggest part is either thrown into the ocean or is landfilled. And Mondi, as a packaging and paper company, we said we have to have an answer for that. And we have these answers with 3 words: replace, reduce, recycle. And I'm not going into any depth about it, because that's not the purpose of today. But we were like thinking, so which plastic products could be replaced by paper products? Then we said to ourselves, in many cases, you need plastic, but how can you have much less plastic? So it's about reduction. And if you, for instance, use instead of a plastic bottle, a plastic stand-up pouch, you've already saved 70% material and 70% CO2 emission. And if you use plastic, it is absolutely important that it's recyclable. And the problem today, why is there such a low recycling rate? Because most of the plastic we use can't be recycled because it consists of several polymers. So what has this to do with ecosystems? As soon as you start to think about it, so we developed really innovative patents to make plastic recyclable, so to make a new product which doesn't use several polymers, but just one. Now this is absolutely great, but you need the recycling companies who are interested to recycle it then in reality. You need other products where you can use recycled products. For instance, you can't use it for food packaging. You need a consumer, because if you have developed a great paper solution and paper has less CO2, it's no plastic waste, it disappears, even if it's not recycled within a few years, whereas plastic only disappears within 500 years, and nanoplastics only after 2,000 or 3,000 years. That's all great, but it doesn't help you if you have many other actors in the game. And so we've joined organizations like Ellen MacArthur. We are working on a direct basis with a number of companies, because we realize if it's just us who has the problem, so if we develop, for instance, stand-up pouches, which stand really very well to replace a plastic bottle, it doesn't help if there are no machine suppliers who can offer to our customers, the FMCGs, the appropriate problem. Now you could say, but this is what markets are for, so the markets will sort it out. But unfortunately that doesn't work for 2 reasons. One is, you have today a number of externalized costs which are not internalized in the system. The plastic which is floating in the ocean is not paid for by anyone. The recovery costs, the collection costs the recycling costs are not covered today by anyone, and that's exactly where the problem comes in. And the second problem is you can't market your own product if there is no demand. For instance, you make recycled plastic, so you then have the recycled products if others don't exist. So it's about building up a whole ecosystem. So how do you manage that? Actually, one could start with saying you can't really lead an ecosystem, because an ecosystem is defined as something which consists of many autonomous parts. And so leadership of autonomous parts isn't that a contradiction in itself? You have a number of players. In our case, our customers, the FMCGs, the governments, the media, the NGOs, the end consumer, machine supplier, plastic supplier, etc. They all have a different purpose. They all have different goals. They all have different cultures, different organizations, different incentives. So how can you combine it? And I've thought about it, and probably it exists already in academia, but I've thought about how could you call that and what is it? And I would come up with a suggestion of collaborationship. So it is a sort of leadership, because you can't just say the market will do it. You also can't say the governments will do it. You have to do it yourself, but in a much more complex environment. And this does include leadership, but it is not leadership pure, exactly because there are so many different parts with different agendas and with different purposes. So at the end of the day, I think it's three aspects which are really important in doing that. Number one, you have to build trust. Secondly, you have to build a purpose, because yes, you all have different goals, you all have different agendas, but you must have one vision, one overall purpose which unifies you. In this case, how to make packaging more sustainable, how to reduce plastic. And last not least, it's a lot about empowerment. So to sum up, I do not believe that leadership of these ecosystems is really possible in the classical sense because of all these things, but it requires, so to say, a higher level of a transformation to this collaborationship. And this collaborationship is built upon these three elements of empowerment, of trust, and of purpose. And I'm looking forward now what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I'm sure we're going to come back to collaborationship and those elements of purpose, trust, and empowerment, and how can you really create that. Let me now turn to Amy. Would love to have you share some of your research around cross-boundary teaming, and what does it really take? What are the key success factors?
Fantastic. Okay, I think we have to start with a little preposition trouble, or at least two categories. So there's leadership of the ecosystem, which is a pretty tall order, and then there's leadership in the ecosystem, which I think is more my domain. I keep thinking every time I walk up the stairs and I see the beautiful posters, the power of ecosystems. I keep thinking maybe that would be better described as the challenge of ecosystems. And one of the primary challenges of ecosystems is that they require us to be fluent in a set of behaviors that don't come naturally. And more specifically, well, this is what we used to call the soft stuff before we realized it was the hard stuff, right? And very specifically, ecosystems require us to be masters of teaming, and that doesn't come naturally. Why not? Well, two big reasons. One are the technical and logistical challenges of teaming with people, collaborating and coordinating across boundaries of all kinds, expertise, distance, hierarchy, nationality, and so on and so forth. Just so many opportunities for complexity, misunderstanding, and the like. And the other one, which is more my domain, are the interpersonal or social psychological challenges of teaming. The very real possibility of making what was earlier today called the fundamental attribution error, making inferences about others that are unflattering, which, by the way, is something we tend to do when things don't go well. Now, in teaming and ecosystems, there is a very high probability that things will sometimes not go well. And so we will be prone to making attributions about each other that are not flattering. We got to get over it. Maybe more comprehensively, teaming in ecosystems requires us to take interpersonal risk. And taking interpersonal risk meaning raising an idea that might not be a good one, or asking a question when you sort of think maybe I'm supposed to already know the answer to that, or pointing out a mistake or a failure. All of those things are interpersonally risky. That is to say that they are much more likely to happen, and happen effectively, in an environment of psychological safety. That's one part. The second part is just this ability, and it was also referred to earlier this afternoon, of the ability to perspective take. You know, the ability to take risks, but also the ability to literally step back and force yourself to see it from others' perspective and realize where your gaps are and get interested. So probably the key skill in teaming is the skill of inquiry, driven by a capacity for curiosity and an almost necessary partner of humility, a sense that, oh yeah, I don't know everything. And we've got to remind ourselves that we don't, because our brains lie to us. Our brains tell us that we see reality when, of course, we don't. So I've been doing studies of teaming in ecosystems in healthcare delivery, and it was great. The panel this morning was absolutely terrific in looking at some of those challenges, some of the dilemmas that we face. I've also been looking at teaming in the ecosystem of the built environment, more specifically in the creation of smart city projects. And in every case, I see a combination of misunderstanding and what I like to call professional culture class, where we come together, and when things go wrong, we do end up making those attributions. So this is where leadership comes in. Leadership comes in because leadership is what's needed to help us do that which is unnatural. So I started out by saying teaming across boundaries in ecosystems is not necessarily a natural act. Leadership needed. I can also, and I like to, define leadership as the art of harnessing the efforts of others to achieve greatness. Now, when we do that well, we increase the chances that we're harnessing the unique skills and capabilities and ideas and passions of individuals and helping them combine it together to get great things done. So, in short, achieving teamwork, collaboration, coordination, and ecosystems is fundamentally a challenge, and one that calls for leadership, and the kind of leadership that models really two types of key behaviors. One is modeling the curiosity, modeling the humility, doing that by asking questions, doing that by acknowledging where your own gaps are, and then two, by creating the conditions whereby others can show up and do their best work. And I think that's done through purpose. That's done through the creation of psychological safety, which I could go on and on about how to do that. I cannot and will not right here, right now, but I encourage you to give it some thought. And I am really eager to hear what my colleagues have to say from here. So thank you, Mary.
Fantastic. So Amy, one of the things you said was leadership is the art of harnessing the attributes of others to achieve the efforts of others to achieve greatness, which I think is a perfect segue to Raj and all the work that you've done around conscious capitalism and creating conscious ecosystems that aren't just the good of the one, but the good of the many. So Raj, would love for you to share some of your perspectives and work.
Thank you, Mary. Really happy to be here and be part of this wonderful panel. I thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just telling you, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, what is conscious capitalism. It's a movement that we started about 11 years ago, and it's grown to be in about 20 countries and about 45 US cities. The idea is that we need to rethink the fundamental questions about business: the why, the what, the who, and the how. Why do we exist? And the low consciousness answer is simply to make money. And the higher consciousness answer is we need to serve a higher purpose, something that is aligned with real problems and challenges that we face in the world. What do? The old answer was we make profits and returns for shareholders. Now it's we create value for all stakeholders, and we align them together so that it's a win-win-win-win-win for all of the stakeholders, and that then encompasses the ecosystem. Who are we as leaders? In the old way, we were focused primarily on results, on efficiency, right, on outcomes. And now we're much more purpose-driven, and we're much more driven by creating value for stakeholders and impacting the lives of people in a positive way. And then how does it feel to work here? The cultures in the past were predominantly rooted in performance-based incentives and metrics. And now it's much more about creating a culture of trust and authenticity and caring, genuine caring for human beings. So these are the 4 pillars: higher purpose, stakeholder integration, conscious leadership, and caring cultures. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk more about conscious leadership. You know, Peter Drucker had wonderful things to say about just about every subject, but on leadership, I love this quote of his, that there are only 3 things that happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. And everything else takes leadership. You could take the most well-intentioned, brilliant people, put them together, you come back a few hours later, you'll have friction, confusion, and underperformance, until somebody steps into the mantle of leadership, the awesome responsibility of leadership, which is to create a vision for what's possible. Where can we go? How can we get to a better place? And then harness our collective capacities to get there. And over the years, as we have studied many, many conscious leaders and tried to understand what makes a conscious leader, and we've distilled it down to an acronym that describes the qualities, and the word is selfless. A conscious leader is selfless. They have transcended the self. Viktor Frankl talked about self-transcendence as a level beyond self-actualization. You cannot be a selfish human being and call yourself a leader, because that means you're going to use the people you lead and use them to achieve your personal goals. And that's the definition of a tyrant. That is not a leader. A true leader is selfless. They have transcended the self. They're about taking us collectively to a better place. And the qualities are strength. Leaders have to be strong. They have energy and enthusiasm, and purpose-driven leaders naturally have that. They're rooted in love and care. And this is really important. You have to have strength and love together. Strength without love is tyranny, and love without strength is ineffective. In the last century on this continent, we had many very strong leaders who almost destroyed human civilization. We need that combination. The leaders who have moved us forward combine strength with love. Lincoln, Gandhi, Mandela, King transformed society for the better because they combined tremendous strength, tremendous moral courage with a great capacity for love. And then flexibility, long-term orientation, and then emotional systems and spiritual intelligence. And these are all qualities that we can cultivate. IQ is fixed, but these other qualities can be increased. So what we find is that there's a blending of masculine and feminine. Great leadership requires both, right? We talk about strength, discipline, courage, caring, compassion, inclusiveness, empathy, etc. But it goes beyond that. The summary phrase we now use is that a great leader must be a wise fool of tough love. You have to be wise and foolish. You have to have that elder energy, the wisdom that comes with age, but at the same time be connected to your healthy inner child. Have the lightness of being, have the humor, right? The creativity and joy come from that. And then you have to have toughness and love. As Martin Luther King said, we must be tough-minded and tender-hearted. It's not one or the other, but of course, historically, leadership has been all about strength, all about tough-minded, all about using people to achieve results, but at great human cost. And that's really where purpose comes in. If you look at the world, we've created great material prosperity, relative peace now, but there is still a lot of human suffering. And that suffering in many ways is on the rise. Violence, physical violence is down, but psychic suffering is way up. Depression, drug addiction, anxiety, and suicides are all going up. Of course, we have tremendous suffering at a planetary level of other species and the planet itself. And so I've come to believe that the purpose, the meta purpose of our time is healing, and that every great business needs to have a healing purpose, that we need to be about alleviating suffering in the world, in whatever dimension we choose to focus in. and elevating joy and promoting healthy growth. We have an obsession with growth, but too much of the growth in our world is like cancer. It's not healthy. It's coming at the expense of a lot of human flourishing. So how can we create more healing in the world? How can we spread more joy, which is the focus of our recent book, The Healing Organization. Yes, so I think I'll stop here and we'll pick up some of the other themes later on, I'm sure.
I'm sure we're going to want to pick up lots of these things going on. Thank you so much, Raj. So Kim, we'd love to hear your experience at Steelcase. So we've heard about leaders developing trust and purpose and empowerment, about curiosity and humility, about selflessness and being strong and loving and creating a healing organization. We'd love to hear your experience at Steelcase. How does this come to life?
Thank you so much. What beautiful themes to explore today. It's such a gift. I think every day I'm amazed, one, at the opportunities that we have to sit in front of audiences like you and collaborate and connect around themes that are going to change our world. At Steelcase, our organization, we talk about purpose, and our purpose truly is to unlock human promise. And what that means to me and my role is really delivering on that promise in the communities where we live and work throughout the globe in ways where we engage our employees. When we start to think about what purpose means when it comes to life, and what that means for our clients and our partners and our employees. When I was given the topic of leadership, and especially coming in here, and you can all tell by my accent, I live in Germany. I am living in Munich right now, but I am American. I'm American, and I was born in Korea, so I'm a Korean-born American that now lives in Germany. And when I think about ecosystems and leadership, I bring this up because it has taught me a lifetime of understanding, one, that I felt like the world was made up of places I didn't belong, and two, how resilient the human spirit is. And when we think about what leadership is and how I want to lead in an organization that has thousands of employees in many cities throughout the world, it's through that lens of understanding that shared humanity. So what is it that binds us together? What is that shared leadership principle that we can all have? And for an organization that is focused in on space and shapes the daily existence, when I look out at an audience like this today, I think of the hundreds, maybe thousands of clients that each of you have here in the room today. And when we start to exponentially think about our role in that leadership, it becomes the hundreds of thousands or the millions of lives that we impact every day. Not just our employees, not just our supply chains, but we lead. We lead every single day with the experiences that we design and how we're able to bring that to market in a really beautiful, hopeful, and conscious way. My role at Steelcase now gives me the beautiful opportunity to see how amazing the human response is in each of those locations. I say to people, I see some of the darkest suffering in the world in communities where we live and work. And I also get to see the beauty of human response. And I think what binds us together in each of these circumstances is people have gifts to give. People are beautiful, abundant creatures that really want to make a difference in the world. And I've sat through panel after panel these past 2 days, and we hear over and over, I want to find that purpose. I want to give back. I want to be a part of that solution. And we have the opportunity to come together and do that every single day. When I think of the role that Steelcase plays specifically in that, these environments that we create, the workplaces that we design, that we live in, the healthcare settings where people are healing, the education organizations where people are learning, we design those experiences with each one of you every single day. And when we think about leadership and how leadership happens, I always think about one of our employees coming together saying, I have this great idea. I've got this great idea. What if we were to follow that journey of the idea through physical space? Not just the idea itself through the transaction, but going through the transformational journey through physical space. And usually what you start to see is our organizations or our environments designed to accelerate those ideas, to help people make those leadership decisions, or our environments designed to hinder or stifle those ideas. When I think about leadership spaces, and this comes to that leadership piece again, if you think of an idea coming before your desk, the majority of you are decision makers in the audience. What I love about the organization that we have in the Munich Learning and Innovation Center, when an idea happens, our leadership space is on the first floor, no barriers. When you're walking up to get into each one of our spaces, you have open and unfiltered access to each of our leaders. Every morning, we're able to say hello to each one of our employees that walk by. We're able to authentically greet each one of our customers. When we start to think about the barriers that we create to leadership, so often we create environments or ecosystems in space that hinder the progress that we have each and every day with those experiences that we design. When you think about this, space shapes people's behavior, and behavior over time becomes that culture. And what is the culture of transparency? What is the culture of trust? If you have your idea and it has to go up 17 floors behind locked doors and through multiple layers and filters physically, imagine how that happens when we start to talk about open and transparent organizations. My favorite example is always, each of us has probably had this moment where you're in an organization and you see them sitting, one in a chair over there. You're walking by with your colleague or with a friend, and someone will inevitably say, oh, that person over there that's sitting on the sofa having a coffee with their computer, they're not working. They're not at their desk. But we know that the world, the ecosystems have started to shift and change, that those locations aren't the places that work happens. When we start to have those unwritten rules start to come to life, this is where the shifts and changes start to happen. We every day get to see the power of the ecosystem and space and how that starts to transform the organization, how we start to build transparency and trust, how culture is delivered every single day, and how leadership can actually manifest itself through a lens of purpose. And we look forward to sharing that with each of you.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on one of the themes around how space and design can help create the conditions for people to succeed and thrive and really be at their full potential. And maybe use that as a segue to some of the work you've done, Jennifer, around what are the conditions to help people in their professional lives succeed and thrive? And in particular, how can people think about their personal networks, their personal ecosystems that need to be in place? So we'd love for you to share some of your latest work.
Thanks. So I want to focus on what it takes psychologically to lead and make leaders in our new ecosystems. Now, if we think of the past, organizations used to be the place in which leaders were made or broken, but that's just no longer the case. As mobility increases and the paths to leadership become more unclear, what we find are the people that can rise us up to leadership positions and the people who can drag us down are no longer just the people who are alongside us, above us, or below us in our organizations. We're constantly told in these new ecosystems that community matters, and we need to build a community that spans across organizations, just as Peter was talking, across organizations, across professions, and across our personal and professional life. And my work has really looked at what are the circles outside of our professional sphere that can really make or break our leadership ambitions. And specifically, I've been looking at the closest personal relationships we have, those with our partners. Now, if we think of our partners vis-à-vis the new ecosystems, we can see that the ecosystems have taken across and embedded in them a very biased idea from the old ecosystems. And this is the idea that leaders have a singular commitment to their work, a singular commitment to leadership, and a singular commitment to their organization, that others depend on leaders, no more so than their partners, who are the support crew who manage their life and family, so leaders can give themselves 100% to their organizations, to their ecosystems. Now, we know this is no longer the case. In the countries where we all live and work, more than 70% of professionals are in working couples. And on the surface, our organizations do talk about this. They pay lip service. We talk a very good game of diversity and inclusion. But if you scratch the surface, as I have done in my research, and look at the logic that the talent management structures and processes, the paths to leadership are built on, they're built on this faulty logic, that leaders commit themselves 100% to work. And this creates a huge issue for contemporary couples. And the issue is a power issue. Now, in couples, when I talk about power, a partner has power when they get the chance to have a shot at their dreams. And of course, today we're talking about professional and leadership dreams. And what we find is the new ecosystem makes it very hard for couples to maintain a balance of power. Now, early in a couple's relationship, if you think back for a few moments to the early days of your relationships, the honeymoon period, most couples have a relatively good balance of power. We understand each other's ambitions, we support each other, and things tend to go fine. But over time, and in the pushes and pulls of our ecosystems, we see that balance of power tip within couples, such that one partner becomes the one who can have and can do, and the other partner becomes the one who can't. And this is a fast track to resentment, to conflict, and to limiting our leadership ambitions of both couples. And it's really important to recognize that the power dynamics in couples do not necessarily relate to who earns the most and who has the most high status or prestigious job. So one couple I worked with, she was actually a CEO, a very powerful lady. And yet when I talked to her, she said, I really feel my career has been a failure. There were other things I wanted to do. I wanted to go into public policy. I wanted to go into teaching. But she hadn't done that because she'd really been supporting her partner's dreams, which was in the entrepreneurial sector. Now, he had made it, and he was very grateful to her, but she felt lost along the way. She lost the ability to pursue her dreams. And this happens time and time again in couples. And the reason it happens is that every couple out there, my couple, your couple, has a power deal. A deal about who has the power and how much power they have to pursue their dreams. Now, the issue is not the power deal. The issue is that for most couples, this deal is not discussed and it's not negotiated. Instead, it's developed in the ecosystems we live in, which are incredibly biased and which pull us into this state of inequality in our couples. And this is damaging for us all. It's damaging for our partners, our couples, our organizations, and our ecosystems. And in my recent book, I talk about what is the work it takes for couples to build a balanced power deal, for couples to resist the pushes towards inequality in our ecosystems. And I find that the work it takes is real deep discussions around what is it we really want, negotiations around what are the lines we are unwilling to cross, and then a deep understanding not just of how we can support each other, but of what it is exactly we're supporting in our couples. And what I find is that couples that work are leadership amplifiers. They build two people's capacity to lead. And in the new world of ecosystems, they are the leaders who can mindfully change our ecosystems from the inside out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So lots of food for thought. I'm going to kick us off with a few questions, but then we're going to invite you all to also share your questions. And there's a high-tech and a low-tech way you can do that. Sadly, the high-tech is having some challenges, so we actually have some humans with microphones who will be coming to take your questions in just a minute. But let me kick it off. We heard at the start of this panel about all these different skills and capabilities and attributes of the leaders that we need for today and tomorrow. I'd love to hear from you about what are we seeing in terms of what organizations are doing? How are they building these capabilities? How are they shaping these mindsets, these behaviors? So maybe, Peter, I'll start with you, but then Amy, Raj, I'd love to get views from the panel.
Yeah, we've definitely, obviously we do normal things with our Mondi Academy, we do training, we do coaching, but what is 80, 90%, I don't know, is training on the job. So think carefully, whom should you expose to which situations? Sometimes you can't plan for it, but sometimes you can. And then really say someone, let's say, has been in a very stable environment, let's put them into a more challenging one, where it's more about building something new or restructuring something old or whatever. So it is so important because the natural tendency we have in an organization is the opposite. Someone is well known to be a good restructurer. Someone else is well known to drive more innovative businesses. And it's so challenging almost to counterintuitively put them into other roles. But it's so important to get a rounded picture and also to detect new things.
Thank you. Other thoughts, perspectives? Amy, do you want to?
I mean, a perspective that I have and I see more and more of is the perspective of, I'm a big fan of leadership programs. I teach in many of them. And that's not the only solution. It may even be a solution on the way. And I think I'm a big fan of the kind of leadership development that happens, as Peter is describing it, in action. Right? It's through, so if you think about your job as a leader in any ecosystem, a primary aspect of that job is the development of others. How do you do that? Well, I think you give them high-quality developmental opportunities. What's a high-quality developmental opportunity? Well, I think it's one in which you are doing real work. And there are two attributes of that work. It matters to the person doing it, that they have a connection, they will be excited about this, and it matters to the organization, right? It's aligned with the organization's purpose. And the second big attribute is that it's a stretch, right? It's going to be a challenging opportunity to do something that matters, but in a way that's going to stretch and necessarily grow you. So it's leadership development in the process of getting important things done with and for others.
Thank you. Kim, you lead the Social Innovation Unit. You've been doing lots of fascinating work on learning. Would love to hear your experience.
Yeah, I love that. I love hearing that applied learning. When we think about the projects that our employees have throughout the world, I think of this example. We have a team in Cluj, in Romania. And they had come to me, they had reached out to me, and they said, you know, I really, in my community where I live and work, what I struggle with in the community is understanding that our young women in the community don't have the access to opportunities for equitable outcomes. I want to do something about that. And I love, first of all, that this is a project that they want to dive into, one, and two, that we make the space and we value the fact that this is a real project. It's real work that's happening. They got together with a nonprofit organization, and they designed and built, through the lens of design thinking, this week-long immersion for girls to go through what they started as the Glow Camp, Girls Leading Our World. It's now Camp Ignite. What they did is they did the instructional design. They did the marketing. They did the communications. They started doing cross-functional teams coming together to do these projects, to really understand how to facilitate, how to lead in ways that they hadn't done before. When they delivered this, they had invited me, and I had come for the last day, and it was amazing to see, dozens of girls coming together with their lives being transformed through the role that our employees played through a lens of learning. That connection to purpose for our employees was transformational. It changes our role in society. It changes from a transactional role to a transformational role. We're not just going to write the check. We're going to understand what are the needs, what are the causes our employees care about. I used to lead learning in EMEA for Steelcase. Any class that I could have set all of our employees through to teach them one by one the methods and mindsets of innovation, how to do public speaking, how to do event organizing, how to do cross-functional teaming. They would have learned it. But when they did this Girls Leading Our World camp, they will never forget it. And that connection to purpose, finding what is within our value stream, what are those talents, what are those gifts that our employees have that we can start to unleash and connect to the community. If the community is stronger, we are all stronger, and we are part of that ecosystem. We're now in multiple years of this camp, and after year one, when they came back to me and they said, Kim, the Glow Camp was a success. We want to standardize this. They're putting it together. But we realized in year two that we needed to teach boys how to empower women as well. So they do a Glow Camp and what they call a Bro Camp. So every year, they're learning and they're iterating and they're finding new ways to share their talents, both inside and outside of the organization.
Thank you. Raj, maybe a slightly different question, which is you've done so much research on conscious capitalism. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what do the best leaders do in order to champion conscious capitalism? What does it look like? What does it mean?
Well, I'd like to use the example of Whole Foods, actually, which is one of the pioneering companies in this movement as well as of this philosophy. They started in 1978 in Austin, Texas, with the name Safer Way. So there's a large grocery chain in the US named Safeway. And this little company said, no, there's a safer way. We don't think you need to be putting in all those artificial ingredients and chemicals and pesticides and preservatives into your body. So they started with a very clear sense of purpose, that what you put into your body makes a difference to your health and to the health of the food system and ultimately to the health of the planet. Right? And that's been their driving purpose from day one. And around that, they've created a large ecosystem that's continually expanding. Of course, starting by attracting employees who cared about food and who were very health conscious, investors who passionately believed in what they were trying to do, of course customers were attracted to them, and then suppliers were a bit of a challenge. So over the years, a big emphasis for them has been how do we cultivate more supply of this kind of food, and how do we change upstream the practices. And one of the things that they have done, and I think this is a model for many others as well, it is bringing in partnering with nonprofits and other entities in the world. So they've set up 5 of their own foundations as they have grown, and they've seen which pieces of the puzzle are actually not being addressed by the business itself, and we need to do things via foundations and partnerships with other nonprofits. So they have the Whole Planet Foundation that now does micro-lending in 69 countries, and they've reached about 5 million, mostly women, small farmers, and converting them from traditional chemical-based agriculture towards more organic and natural ways of producing food. They've set up the Whole Cities Foundation to bring healthy food options into the inner cities in the US, places like the south side of Chicago or Newark or Detroit, and others where in those neighborhoods all you get is junk food and convenience stores and packaged food, right? And so now they're putting in stores into those areas, and they're sparking a renaissance of not only development but healthy options that people are being given a choice. Parents started telling them, what are you going to do about school lunch programs? And they said, well, how is that, why should that be? I said, no, you need to do something. Nobody's doing anything. So finally they set up the Whole Kids Foundation. And now they will come in and set up a salad bar and plant an organic vegetable garden in any school that wants one. Right? And they've done thousands of schools now. And they'll educate teachers and parents and children about health and nutrition. They were concerned about the treatment of animals in the factory farming system, so they set up the Global Animal Partnership, which is now a standalone foundation, to create ethical treatment standards for the ethical treatment of animals, starting with no caging and so forth, and going up 6 levels, etc. So again, these are examples of initiatives that they have taken that have greatly expanded the scope of what they do, and they are now sort of setting in motion a series of other changes. And the other thing that happens, interestingly, which you wouldn't expect, when you are a truly purpose-driven company, then you even start to think of your competitors in a different way. So I remember years ago when Walmart announced a big push into organic and natural foods. And I was with John Mackey at one of our conferences, and I said, John, how do you feel about this? And he said, well, it's good news and bad news. I said, okay. He said, well, you know, it's bad news because Walmart is going to be a tough competitor and put a lot of downward pressure on price, and it'll strain the supply chain, so that'll be tough competitively. But on the other hand, it's great news. And I said, what do you mean? How is it good news when Walmart invades your core market? He said, well, our purpose is to bring more healthy food options to more people and greater awareness of these things. Walmart is now going to help us achieve our purpose. So even competitors become fellow travelers when you have a higher purpose and when you start to see others. So you start to think of all stakeholders in a different way when you're looking at it from a purpose-driven lens.
Thank you. That's a really inspiring example. Amy, maybe ask you, you've done a lot of research around cross-boundary teaming. I'd love to hear some of the most interesting examples you've come across.
Oh, that's the probably the most just viscerally profound example I've come across is the Chilean mine rescue, right? And I was just thinking about it. Something you said led me to think about it. And as I'm sure many, if not all of you will recall, on August 10th, 2003, there was a massive collapse at the San Jose copper mine in northern Chile, and 33 miners were suddenly trapped. And trapped, if they had done their homework, which there was every bit of belief that they had, they would likely have gone to a refuge, which was 700 meters below ground. And that's 700 meters below some of the hardest rock in the world. So the short story here is, there is literally no solution. There's no solution within the industry. There's no technology existing in the industry that can get through rock that hard fast enough to save their lives. And yet, as you also certainly know, about 70 days later, they were all out, right? And so how do you go from impossible to done? And the answer is cross-boundary teaming, and I really mean it, cross-nation, cross-industry. I mean, absolutely crucial design thinking, really, technical and sociological ideas came from players from different industries, different countries, different sectors, teaming together in constantly shifting configurations over 24 hours a day, over 70 days. It's the most profound story of innovation that I know. It's also the most profound story of crossing boundaries to genuinely make progress on something that people decided to be galvanized about. And everything about how they did it at the kind of molecular level gives us insight into how to do this well. I mean, there was immense willingness to ask good questions, to listen, to brainstorm, and probably most importantly of all, to try things without any guarantee that they would work. And 9 times out of 10, they didn't. And yet, 9 times out of 10, they produced at least some insight into what might work next. Right? So it's an iterative process, and I think this is true, maybe not quite as extreme, in any cross-boundary teaming, is that it is an iterative process of learning by doing, but not stumbling around, like very smart, very hypothesis-driven learning by doing, with a common purpose. And by the way, one of the most interesting leadership insights from that story was that Andrei Sugaret, who led the technical aspects of the rescue, reminded folks, engineers, mining specialists, logistics experts, every day, he reminded them of what was at stake. In other words, he reminded them of the shared purpose. Now, you might think, there's no way on Earth they would forget their shared purpose. After all, they're thousands of miles or hundreds of miles from home. They're living in tents. I mean, they don't forget why they're there. And yet, Sugaret recognized that in order to really truly keep that sense of creativity and energy and passion going against immense hardship, he had to keep reminding him of and I think of it, remind, bring the mind back to what really matters on a daily basis, which I often remind people in the healthcare delivery context, that even though it seems like the purpose is obvious and you shouldn't need as a leader to remind people because you're saving lives every day, it's obvious. It's not obvious in the moment where there's frustration and exhaustion and disagreement and all of those things.
Thank you. What an
If I
amazing
could just
story.
add
Yeah, Raj, please.
Just a brief comment. I think you highlighted part of what I was going to say. There has to be a noble purpose and a caring culture at the same time, right? And you mentioned healthcare. So healthcare has a noble purpose. Doctors and nurses and veterinarians, they go into it because they passionately want to be part of healing and reducing suffering. And yet, the levels of depression, anxiety, and suicide are much higher in that profession. So even our healing professions have become places of suffering because we don't have caring cultures. A lot of companies have a noble outward-facing purpose, and yet internally, their own people are suffering. So it's that combination that we need, a truly caring culture where we put people at the center of everything that we do, right? As they say, loved ones caring for loved ones. You have to first love the people who are going to do the caring for your customers. And that combination is often missing. In this age, purpose has become very fashionable, as you know, and many companies are adopting that, but they're not doing the work internally, right, to combine that. We have to have both of those pieces in place.
Thank you. Let me open it up to questions from the audience. So again, we should have some roving mics so please just raise your hand and we'll take questions from the group. This is the interactive bit, by the way.
Yeah, hi.
Please.
Yeah, my question is that I'm wondering, and I'd really be so interested in your answer. There's so many great books and knowledge about what great leadership is about. I mean, there are the most smartest people, institutions, university, researching what the skills should be, and so we have all the knowledge, and still yet there are so few great leaders. At least I have not met them, but I really think there's a lack of amazing leaders out there who are able to deliver all of that. And if we think about ecosystem leadership, it's going to be even more difficult, more demanding. How are we going to make sure that we have these people who have also something like a noble leadership, I would say, that's more orchestrated than leading, being like the first out there? Yeah, I'm worried about that, and I wonder if just having the knowledge is enough, and how we can make sure that we cultivate this kind of leadership where that's needed so much. Thank you.
Great. So how do we build the quantity and quality of leaders we need? So maybe Jennifer and then Raj?
Yeah, so I think we need to be very careful not to idealize leaders and have the bar for a great leader to be so high that it's impossible to get there. Because we know this cycle of idealization is, what creates tyrants, essentially. So I think we need to lower the bar a little bit and think about what we want is human leaders, right? And they will be people who make mistakes, who really screw things up, but who can learn from it. And I think if I think of what are the leaders I would like leading organizations, they're not perfect people. They're not people who reach these high bars, but they're people who can do what Amy said, right? Who can constantly remind themselves, what am I here for, and how are we going to get that? And I don't think it even needs to be this huge, noble goal. It might just be around making the small ecosystem I am in a lot better. And I think that's when we get leadership across organizations, when we can really humanize it and stop idealizing this perfect person who's going to save us from AI or climate change or something else.
Thank you. Raj?
Well, I think the system that we've been in for the last close to 50 years, the shareholder-centric paradigm, I think that's given rise to a kind of leader. So the system has been self-selecting certain kinds of leaders who are purely focused on numbers, profits, financials, etc. Right? So we've created a world in which we've generated more and more of those kinds of leaders, and they're the ones who get elevated into senior ranks, and it's kind of self-perpetuating. They then occupy boards of directors and so forth. So I think when we haven't had a noble purpose and overriding purpose beyond profit, everything has become about self-interest, and the most self-interested people are the ones who have risen rapidly in those systems. Now, power and virtue need to go together in the world, but I think we've been living through a half century where that hasn't been the case. And people who seek power are not the most virtuous, they're the most Machiavellian. And the most virtuous shy away from power because they see power as inherently corrupt in some way. And I think this idea of healthy personal power for conscious leaders, this is one of the big things that we have to focus on, because we need to empower the people who are truly doing the right things and want to do the right things and have them in positions to be able to make a difference.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I just want to build a bit on what Jennifer said, because that's so important. So one reads books and about Martin Luther King or Gandhi or whatever, and then it's like that's not me. I mean, and I think so my experience, the first thing is to say that's fine. Yes, it's you want something, and also with your organizations, there are things which are. Yes, you want someone who is more flexible, you will want someone who is more caring, but all the nice books also you read about, we should never forget that they always have something polished, not intentionally, but by nature. If someone tells their story or their experience, they wouldn't tell the worst one. So this acceptance is so important. And this second thing I wanted to say to that question, it's so much about feedback. So give to these leaders who are obviously not the Gandhis or whatever, and it's just also interesting to see how these things change. So once away, when I was young, it was Jack Welch. Today you don't use Jack Welch anymore. You use other people. Yeah, but give them feedback, what's not fine, and they will improve, but it will never be ideal. That's how we are.
Thank you. Let me get a few more questions in. So over to the left. There we go.
Hi, my question is to Raj. Do you have any examples of any organizations which, unlike Whole Foods, started off as a growth-obsessed, profit-centered organization, but still subsequently made that change to purpose-driven and embraced conscious capitalism? Because if you think about it, that seems to be an incredibly difficult thing to do. But if we have those examples and many organizations are able to do that, they'll have such a profound impact.
Yeah, no, we do have a number of those. I agree it's not an easy thing to do, but it all depends on leaders. You cannot have a conscious organization without conscious leaders. The level of consciousness of the leader places an upper limit on the level of consciousness of an organization. Now, there are examples of companies where the leaders went through some kind of an epiphany or a growth moment. A well-known one is Interface Carpet, where Ray Anderson read Paul Hawken's book, The Ecology of Commerce, and woke up a transformed human being. And he said, oh my God, I'm a plunderer, what am I doing? And that started a journey for that company, but also ultimately for its ecosystem and its industry as well. Another company that I have personal experience is Bob Chapman, the CEO of a company called Barry Waymiller, right? And the book is Everybody Matters. And Bob was a traditional CEO, MBA from Michigan. He was running his company by the numbers, profit-centered, doing layoffs, doing all the normal things, viewing people as functions and objects and not necessarily as human beings, as we tend to do. And then he had a series of awakenings himself. One in church where the pastor gave a wonderful sermon and everybody was uplifted and inspired. And the thought that Bob had was that, Ed has us for 40 minutes a week and I've got people for 40 hours a week. What am I doing to inspire them? And he realized nothing. And then he was in a wedding where the bride was being given away by the father, and Bob's thought was, I know what the father is thinking, that this is our precious child and we've done everything we can for her, and now we trust that you will do that in this marriage. And his thought was, every one of the 12,000 people in our company is somebody's precious child, and they're deserving of the same level of caring and concern and respect as my daughter would be. So these are the kinds of things that started changing, and that company then completely became a people-centered culture where they say we measure success by the way we touch the lives of people, right? They say our people are our purpose. They make machines that make toilet paper or cardboard boxes. They don't have a noble, exciting product line, but their purpose is really around their people and giving those people a future. And Bob is, with that philosophy, he started acquiring struggling and dying businesses which all had these toxic cultures and no future. Small towns all across the Midwest in Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And he acquired ultimately 108 of them and never sold a single one. And all struggling and dying, some in bankruptcy, turned them all around. And they're all thriving, growing at a compounded 16% rate for the last 20 years now. And it's all done by putting people at the center of everything that they do, right? And putting, I say everybody matters and everybody needs to win, right? And that's kind of the philosophy. So it is completely possible. Every business, doesn't matter what the past has been, as they say that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future, right? So any company, I believe, can be transformed and redeemed, regardless of its past, if you have a leader with the right consciousness and the determination to put people at the center. As Herb Kelleher of Southwest Airlines said, the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. And we've lost sight of that. It's like we need a Copernican revolution, right, where we thought that the earth was the center of the universe, everything revolved around it, and he told us it's not that. We've put profit at the center and everything revolves around that, and that's led to a lot of dehumanization. It's led to a lot of destruction of our own ecosystem. It's led to us living through the 5th mass extinction, all kinds of enormous, in some cases, irreversible damage. And I think that needs to change. We need to put planet and human flourishing at the center of everything that we do in business and make it fundamentally about that.
Thank you. So let's get one or two more questions in. So right at the front.
Yeah. So thanks for the discussion. What really disturbed me in there is that you make no differentiation between the leader and leadership. And from my own experience in organizations that are very self-organized, very similar to what Josten talked this morning, there is leadership throughout, and it's very much about empowering people to step up and get away from this just relabeling the manager to now be the leader, but still the one on top, the one that we look towards, where we look for this idealized leader. So shouldn't we change the discussion and decouple the two? And I think Amy is.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. In fact, in response to the impossible standards question, that I think we have a leadership myth, which is this little box on the top of some big pyramid, and that person, that individual, is responsible for everything happening. Versus, I think the leadership reality, certainly in ecosystems and in any highly functional organization, is boxes all the way around in which people are exercising the activities of leadership, which we can easily define as any time you're influencing the behavior of others in a positive direction, you're exercising leadership. And we all know that there are people doing more and less of that throughout ecosystems every single day. And I think it's possible to encourage even more of it.
Thank you.
No.
So next question. Yes, over here.
Hi. All right. Thank you for the great discussion. Huberto Stucek from University of Landshut. We talk about leadership where you have to go cross-team, cross-border, cross-nations, and we all like to agree and we enjoy this. But when we look at politics, actually we see the opposite. Now my question at you as a team, can you give us any idea of forces or mechanisms that you see that brings us back to the leadership we would like to see on a global level?
All right, who would like to tackle that one? Global leadership.
The only common element that I would say is idealism. Right? We've lived in a world that has become so pragmatic and short-term and outcome-oriented, right? That idealism has almost become a bad word. I think we need idealism in our leaders in the corporate world, and we need idealism in the political world, which used to be inherently about idealism. It's about public service, and it's become all about power and the exercise of power for personal gain. So why do we go into politics? Who becomes a leader? How do we make it and create an environment where that becomes an attractive thing for people to pursue? And that means you have to reconnect to the higher purpose. Everything has a higher purpose. Everything, including Wall Street, everything has a purpose. That's why it exists. But over time, when the purpose becomes money and power, that's when it gets corrupted. And that happened in Wall Street, that happened in the pharmaceutical industry, that's happened in politics, and that's happened in business generally. And when we reconnect back to the original purpose, and then we approach it from that standpoint, we will then attract people into that who will want to be in that for the right reasons to truly make a difference.
Thank you. In a minute, I'm going to ask each of our panelists for their one takeaway for this group of leaders around what it takes to be a really great leader. But maybe one last question before we ask our panelists for their key takeaways. Yep, so there's one over here.
The latest article that was coming out from the Business Roundtable, Jamie Dimon, I'm just curious what comments you have. You probably saw that published, and the thinking, his statement around it's not just about your quarterly earnings, but it's really around the social consciousness and the backlash that he also got for that from corporations.
Great, thank you. Raj, do you want to take?
Well, yeah, to us, it's a validation of what we've been talking about for 11 years. It took them a long time, but I think those pressures have been building under the surface, and the 183 of the largest companies in the US making a verbal commitment to these ideas of purpose, long-term orientation, and taking care of all stakeholders, and specifically addressing that all human beings are entitled to lives of meaning and dignity, right? And those are significant words, and now companies are saying, okay, how do we operationalize this? I think it is starting a process, or it's setting in motion a sequence of things. We always talk about when is our Berlin Wall moment? When does the dialogue shift? When does that which sounds crazy become evident and become obvious, right? And I think something like that could be an early signal that we're approaching some kind of a tipping point where the default story of business becomes about purpose, becomes about stakeholders, and you would have to be arguing the opposite, and you would be considered foolish to say, no, it should only be about shareholders and profits. Like, how could you make that case? I think we're approaching that point.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're almost out of time, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists maybe to share their one piece of advice, their one encouragement or thought for this group. Jennifer, would you kick us off?
Yeah. So I don't like dishing out advice, but as I'm forced, I would say figure out what matters most to you and make sure those closest to you understand it so they can support you in getting there. And I would say be very specific. I think the danger with these lovely big words like conscious capitalism is they push us in a singular direction. And what we see about making a difference is everyone can make a difference in different ways. And if what matters to you doesn't matter to me, that's okay, as long as there's a reason behind it, and as long as people close to you understand it and can support you in getting there.
Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I think when we think about each of our roles, when we go out of here every single day, our role as a leader is to do just that. It's to bring out the very best in each one of the people that we serve. And really take a hard look at who is it that I serve. I always, in the front of my book that I write in every single day, it has a post in it and says, I am accountable to the people that I serve. And those are the people in the communities where we live and work. It's to our employees, it's to each and every one of those people whose lives are impacted by the decisions we make every single day. And when I think about that person that I serve as a leader, how am I equipping them? How am I unlocking their ideas and their promise and creating the safety and the environment for each and every person to bring their best and authentic self to work every single day?
Thank you. Raj?
We're all here to take care of each other on this planet, and business is a way for us to care for each other at scale. We can reach so many more people and have such a bigger impact. And I think we've lost sight of that fundamental driving energy of what business is supposed to be about. In a free market society, governments are not supposed to meet our needs, businesses are. We're given the opportunity, but therefore also the deep responsibility of meeting each other's needs and alleviating our suffering. And when we approach that with the idea of meeting our self-interest by using other people to do so, we create suffering. But when we approach it by saying, I'm going to express myself and serve others and take care of their needs, we actually become healers. And I would encourage you to think about business in that way.
Thank you. Amy?
Leadership is, at its core, about making a better world. And I guess I don't like advice much either, but the advice I would say is embrace the paradoxical nature of leadership. Leadership is as much about direction setting, connecting, helping people connect to a purpose, a direction, as listening. Listening intently, and I love the example of the GLOW camp, right? That was a result of a leader who listened and said yes. go for it. So leadership is as much direction setting as it is listening. It's both and. It's about making a difference. It's done by connecting to a larger purpose. It's about serving the individual and the collective.
Thank you. Last but not least, Peter?
Yeah, I see ourselves moving more to a more narcissistic culture. And I hear a lot of people talking about what they did, and I did this, and I initiated this, and whatever. And I think it was very nicely said in this sentence today, leadership is to bring out the greatness in others. And I think to remind oneself about that it's not about what did I do, but how did I bring someone else to do something great is a very good starting point.
Fantastic. So thank you all. There's been some fascinating perspectives on the power of a noble purpose, the case for conscious capitalism and caring cultures, the characteristics of great leaders: curiosity, listening and learning, humility and selflessness, collaborationship. But it's also about bringing the best in everyone we work with. And it's about thinking about both your professional ecosystem as well as your personal one. So sadly, I'm afraid we're out of time, but please join me in thanking all of our panelists this afternoon.